Hello, welcome back to Texas Cooking Today. Today we are going to be working on a sourdough starter. Now sourdough, a lot of us know what sourdough is. It's a wonderful, yummy tasting dough that's got the big pockets of air inside of it and the hard, crunchy crust. Oh, that's wonderful stuff. Well, I'm going to teach you how to make it, but you have to first make a starter. And if you think that you're going to just decide to make sourdough bread one day and then suddenly you're going to be making it that afternoon, unless somebody gives you a starter, that's not going to happen. So what we have to do is start on the starter. The starter is basically the active ingredient for the bread. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to combine flour and water in a large bowl, in a wide-rimmed bowl, and then we're just going to leave it sitting out so that whatever's floating around in the air, the yeast and the bacteria, collects in that flour. Now you might say, ooh, dust is going to collect on it too. Well, unfortunately, yeah, dust, yes it will. But guess what? You inhale dust every day. You exhale it. You inhale the yeast and bacteria and exhale them. They're in the air all the time. So we live with them. All we're going to do now is just take these items and capture them so that we can use them for our benefit. And the yeast loves to eat the flour, okay? The bacteria we're capturing, it loves to eat it also. And so both of them sort of work in harmony. The bacteria is producing basically a vinegary substance, which is the soured part of the dough. And then of course the yeast being there is the active ingredient to make the dough rise. Well, that's really all there is to it. So I'll tell you what, let's go over here, get to our bowls, and I'll show you how we do this, okay? Here's sourdough starter number 1. I am going to be making the sourdough starter now, but first I need to take my starter that I have in the refrigerator. Notice how thin this is, and this has some whole wheat in it also, which gives it some of its color. Now also part of that color is yeast as well. I'm going to put in 1/3 of a cup of flour on this. Let me get some water. Go. I'm going to add just a little bit less water, about 1/4 of a cup of water, because it was already pretty thin. Now what I'm doing here is I'm taking a starter and I'm feeding it. After I feed this, I am going to put it lid back on it, put it back into the refrigerator, and let it rest in there for a couple more weeks. So this has just been sitting in the fridge for a couple of weeks, doing nothing since the last bread that I made, and it'll sit in there until the next time I want to make sourdough bread, at which time I'll pull it out and I'll put it in a large bowl like this one, and I'll start feeding it at room temperature, and I'll do that about every 6 or 8 hours, and the next day I'll have a starter that is just up, explosive, and ready to go at it. Okay, I think I've got most of the lumps gone. It just needs a lid and to be put back into the refrigerator. There we have it. And from this I'm getting a strong sourdough odor, the exact odor you get when you cut into a fresh loaf of sourdough. And it has a slightly vinegary odor to it, and somewhat yeasty odor. And so that's what this is, just an active culture. Now, to start your starter, or to make an active culture for sourdough, what we're going to do is take some all-purpose flour. I want about 1/2 cup to start with. I'm going to put it in the middle of a bowl. Now the bowl that I'm using for this, you'll notice it's a wide-rimmed bowl, and it's kind of shallow. And that's perfect, because the whole idea here is we are trying to capture bacteria and yeast from the air. So the more area it has to settle on, the better off we are. Now let's take some water here. There we go. Equal amount of water. And simply stir this together. And I know this looks deceptively simple, And in reality, it seems just ridiculous. However, if you think about it, what we're really doing here is we are creating a large petri dish. You know, you remember those in biology where you would capture microorganisms and grow them on the petri dish and or in the petri dish, and then put them under the microscope. You know, take a slide, put it under the microscope, you know, see what you got. Now this feels a little bit thick to me, but that's not a problem. Alright, now I'm going to scrape the sides a little just by rotating the bowl. Alright, well, all we have to do now is wait. So this is day one. We have made some flour paste and we've got it in an open bowl. And if you're worried about insects, you know, flies or anything like that landing in it, that's very simple. Take a simple screen, a frying screen, will work fine. The mesh will still allow microorganisms to fall through and land on your paste, and it'll keep any insects out of it, okay? So, we're off and running here. This shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 weeks at the very most. And sometimes if you got a lot of yeast in your air and a lot of bacteria going on, it might be as short as 1 week. We'll just see. Well, here we are. We're back 24 hours later. Let me remove that screen. Now, this is what we started with last time, okay? Or in your perspective, just seconds ago. Now, what do I need to do here? Normally I would take some of what is in there out and then add more flour and more water, but this time I'm just going to add more flour and more water. After all, we're just trying to increase what we have in our little, I guess, what did I call it last time? Petri dish? Yeah, that's a good description. Let's just take this spoon. We're going to mix this around a little bit. Oh, there we go. This is turning a little bit brown around the edge on what was there before. And that's okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't affect it in any way. Now what I'm doing here is I'm noticing that there are lumps of dry flour in there, and I'm just breaking them apart and mixing them in with the water. So I work the bowl in a circle. There we go. Okay, now we'll mix together what was there yesterday and what I just put in. Now that I've got the first combined, there we go. Now, tomorrow, I may pull out a little of this, you know, a spoonful or two, and then add the next half a cup of flour, half a cup of water. I'm just going to do this night after night after night. I'm doing this every evening. Okay? And this is all you have to do in order to make a starter. Remember, this is just paste. It's flour paste, wheat paste, whatever you want to call it. Okay? And the big bowl here, this is just a giant petri dish. We're catching bacteria and yeast. Well, so be it. I'm going to wash off my spoon and cover this again, and we're going to wait 24 more hours, and we're going to do the same thing again and again and again and again and again and again and again until we have an actual starter. And you're going to see this slowly develop. Now look closely. Right now, this is just a very smooth wheat paste mixture. Nothing really going on in it. Nothing noticeable, no changes, just a wheat paste mixture. Okay. Well, I'll set it back over on the table and let it collect some more of whatever is floating around in the air. Now we are at an extra day here. I let a day go by that I did not do anything with this. Now look, it's kind of crunchy on top. So it's formed a bit of a crust. And this thing puffed up. It puffed up after the first day, which is very unusual. Look how watery it is. My goodness. Well, we're going to see what happens here. I'm not used to that happening, but I'm willing to film it and watch what happens after this. Now, this top that formed, don't worry about that. Just go ahead and mix it in. And I'm going to put in some more flour. There we go. Another half a cup of flour. And a half a cup of water. There we go. Now let's see what happens on this go around. I'm smelling a bit of a vinegary smell, and the action that where it puffed up the other day, that tells me that there is some yeast in there. Now I don't know if I captured that yeast from the wild or if it was in this particular batch of flour or what. Maybe it was left behind on the bowl or on the spoon. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. I've got yeast because I've got my mixture puffing up. I know that. Now that crust that formed on top, I'm not worried about that because in time that's going to dissolve and soften. It's going to be eaten by the yeast. It's not going to really matter. That doesn't matter at all. And this is a bit on the liquidy side. See that? See how it just kind of flows out of my spoon? Okay, well let's go ahead and add a little bit more flour. There we go. And that's just going to thicken that up a bit. Now normally I would remove some of the paste that I have in the bowl, but on this go around I'm just going to add a little extra, and I'll remove more next time than I need to normally. Normally I would take out the same amount that I'm adding in. So if I'm adding a half a cup of flour and a half a cup of water, then I'll take around about a half to 3/4 of a cup out. But this time I'm just going to go ahead and let it go. So that's the thing about a starter. You don't have to be too specific about this, okay? Just kind of experiment with it and work with it and make it what you want it to be. Okay? Now, there we have it. It's back to a paste. Let's see what happens after another 24 hours. Now, it's time for us to go ahead and feed our starter once again. It's been a few days now since we began, and there is a liquid that's pooling on the top. You see this brownish liquid? Okay, and you can remove that if you want. That's okay. Some people stir that in. It's some of the bacteria that we're trying to catch, lactobacillus pooling in the water on top. And I tell you what, right now this one is very strong. I'm getting a very strong odor of vinegar from this, and that's exactly what you want for it to be sourdough. That's the souring part. Well, looky here, you see on top is sort of brownish, underneath it's kind of creamy colored. That means we're catching stuff, okay? Which is what we're trying to do. Well, here we are for another go at it. This time it has been about 2 days since I've done anything with this. Now look how it's turned brown on top and it's still kind of a creamy color underneath. This is letting you know, guess what? Stuff is settling in there. Alright? Stuff has been happening. And yes, there is an acidic odor from it. It's a vinegary smell. And that means lactobacillus is settling in it. Okay? So the right thing is happening. Now, just like I did before, I'm going to go over here to the sink and I'm going to go ahead and spoon out just a little bit of what I have happening here. Well, here we are again, 24 hours later, ready to do this again. Now, we'll take a look at this. Again, I'm getting some liquid pooling on top of this, and that's pretty much normal. I'll remove some of it, but not all. There we go. Get rid of that. We'll stir it. Now, put in some more flour. This time I didn't remove any, if you'll notice. Add some water. There we go. Well, I'm going to do this over and over again until it both has a sour smell to it, which means that vinegary smell, and when you feed it like this, it puffs up. Once it starts puffing up, well, that's when you know that you've got enough yeast in there to go ahead and make some bread with, and you've got a developed starter. At that point, you can also keep a portion of that starter. Use some of it to make bread, keep some. And to keep it, you might want to consider just a simple little jar, something like this. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Do not use a metal container. Remember, yeast and metal do not get along together. Right now I'm just breaking some of the lumps. And if there's a few in there, don't worry about it, because that moisture will soak right into it. Yes, it's been another 24 hours, so I'm going to take a little more out, feed it once again, and set it aside. It started to get a little foamy this last time, and that's a good sign that we have some good development on yeast and bacteria. Well, I'm still at it. Another day, another half a cup of flour. If you're thinking you go through a lot of flour on this, well, guess what? You're right. Okay, flour, water, stir, put it back under the screen, do it for another day. By the way, I have been noticing some differences. There's a difference in the odor on it. There is a little bit of difference in the appearance of it, the color. It also gets a little bit bubbly. However, it isn't rising up the way it should. So what we're going to do is wait until it starts to do that. When it starts to get really fluffy and doubles in mass, then we know it's ready. So, another day and another cup of flour. It has been a few days since my last filming. However, I've been feeding this, and it has now been right at 2 weeks. Exactly, dead on. And if you'll notice, this has doubled in bulk. It rose right up on me. It got bubbly and foamy. Let me pull this up before I touch the surface of this. Look at this. You see the little black specks on it? Those are actually little pockets of air. Okay, they're all over. It's folding over on itself here and here. There's a thick skin that I folded into it earlier, and you know, from where it had kind of dried out on top, and that's not a big deal. Those will dissolve over time as you mix them in. But before I do that, I wanted to pull this out. Look when I pull on it. See the holes in it? Look at that. Look at all these holes that have developed in here. Okay, this is an active culture. It's a very, very active culture. Okay, this is good. This is ready to make bread right here and now. Okay, this is sourdough bread ready. All I have to do is just go ahead and take some of this, mix it into some dough, or rather to some flour and a little extra water, and turn that into a dough. And I'm ready to start rising and turning this into sourdough. It does have a sour smell, but not a strong one. Yeah, it's slightly vinegary, and this is all natural yeast. It's bubbling and going on here. This is ready to be turned into something scrumptious, and I think I should be the one to do it. It's bubbling in front of me and popping and just going at it. Okay, so be it. Well, there's your sourdough starter right there. Maybe I'll show you the bread that comes from it on this video. I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. Anyway, sourdough starter. Here's where you begin with it. Now, was that so hard? It's wheat paste. In a big bowl, you made a petri dish and caught stuff. Okay, that's really weird, but It's active, it's alive, and it should make bread. Now on to the loaf. I thought I would let you share in the experience. I used the majority of my starter. There's a little bit in the bottom of this bowl still left, but the bulk of it was placed right in here with about 2.5 cups of flour. And I am going to knead that up in just a moment. But over here, I need to go back to my starter. I'm going to feed it again. This time I didn't take anything out other than what I took out to make the bread. I'm just going to dump in some flour. This time it was about 3/4 of a cup. There we go. It's a little more paste-like. I need some more water. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to set it up again at room temperature. I'm going to let it double up in bulk again, get nice and foamy. And then I'm going to feed it and put it in a jar and put it in the refrigerator. And the rest of it, what's in that bowl over there, that's going to be making some bread. I'm going to start it to rise. Isn't this ugly? The bowl is dried out and got crusty on the edges, and if those little flakes get into it, it doesn't matter. They will dissolve and get eaten by the yeast the same way everything else does. Okay. There we go. Our starter has started. Let's start a sourdough. Well, there is a beautiful little sourdough loaf, and that's what we just produced from our starter. Okay, so this was the very first loaf off of it. I let it rise a little too long, so I didn't even bother cutting it. I just tossed it into the oven, and it looks like it came out really nice. Good hard exterior on it. Anyway, you'll learn how to do that in some of my other recipes. Okay, but here's your starter, so get on to doing sourdough bread. Well, there we have it. Just a beautiful sourdough starter, and a lovely sourdough also. That one tasted very good. Well, as you can see, sourdough isn't something that just starts overnight, okay? It takes several days to get the starter going, and once you get the starter going, then it still takes time to get that bread up and running. So, I'll tell you what you want to do is take the remainder of your starter, place it in a small jar, and put it in the refrigerator. Pull it out about once every week to once every other week and feed it. Put it back in and keep it there until you decide you want to make sourdough bread again. And when you do, about 2 days before you make it, pull that starter out, put it in a bowl, and start feeding it again just the same way we did throughout this film. When you do that, you'll notice that one day, and it'll be maybe the first day or even the second day, it's going to puff up and get all foamy just like it did before we made bread. And that's exactly what you have to do each and every time. But the thing of it is you have an active yeast culture that was naturally captured by you. And you can't beat that. That is as homemade gets. So enjoy your starter. Thank you for watching Texas Cooking Today. And please check out the rest of our films. You have a good day. Thank you for watching Texas Cooking Today, the show where you can get great recipes and the best techniques are taught. Please subscribe to Texas Cooking Today, where you will always find something hot and ready to eat.